It's always exciting for me to be back at Penn Canada, which is my home after all, and to see so many of former presidents of Penn here. You never get rid of us. And it was a great honor to be on the jury of the Ken Filkow Award with Tom Henheffer, the former executive director of Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, and Natalie Turvey, the executive director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. And I think you all know what the Ken Filkow Award is, but it's named after a great defender of freedom of expression, a lawyer involved with the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, a career of half a century defending freedom of expression. And the prize was created by Philip Slayton and his wife, Cynthia Wine. They're not here, though, I think, are they? They're not here. Yeah. Yeah, and the prize is designed to honor individuals who, quote, actions demonstrate personal courage, and, quote, in freeing information and ideas from restraint or interference. And so it was given the first year to the environmental activist. Is it Frankie James? Is that how you say it? I think. Yeah. And then to Raihan Abir, the Bangladeshi blogger who managed to escape without being murdered. As you know, they've been murdering Fast and Furious bloggers for their beliefs or their refusal to be locked into certain beliefs. And then last year to Desmond Cole for, of course, his work on the discriminatory police practices in Toronto. And so I want to say, Justin Brake, who is the winner of the 2018 prize, that first, that the jury was unanimous, and secondly, that we did not require debate in order to get to unanimity, because we believe that your situation is incredibly urgent, that it's a situation dangerous for freedom of expression in Canada, and that you personally, in many different ways, have shown courage throughout. A lot of people in Toronto don't know about this case because it is, central Canada, thinking everything happens in central Canada. And this happened in Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's still happening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that so you understand how important it is. Justin Brake's situation involves the most fundamental rules of freedom of expression. He is being threatened separately by a rich corporation, a crown corporation, and by the state. For doing his job as a reporter, the corporation and the state, the province, are essentially charging him with trespassing in such a way that he could be at the same time bankrupted and jailed. This is unprecedented. The fact that this case involves an isolated site and Indigenous peoples, Muskrat Falls, and the Innu and Inuit peoples, takes us back to the worst of the old Canada, in which the state and corporations effectively collaborated with each other in order to sideline Indigenous rights and wishes. Justin Brake's coverage ensured that this old-style attempt at maintaining a silence around questionable actions was not successful. The corporation and the state are attempting to punish him for doing his job properly. On the civil case side, because of course there's a civil case and a criminal case at the same time, on the civil case side, from the corporation, this is a serious reminder of how money can be used to chill freedom of expression. Many of us have been involved in libel chill, fighting against it in Toronto. Well, there it is in Newfoundland and Labrador in full flight. If this corporation succeeds and costs Mr. Brake large amounts of money, the message is clear to all other journalists: do not cover such situations in a determined way. Be very careful not to annoy the corporation to an extent they will sue you. On the side of the criminal charges, this is the sort of thing you see in authoritarian or corrupt states in which the law is used to protect private corporate interests against public knowledge and the public interest. In my 6 years as president of PEN International, and Marion is here in her 6 years as chair of the Writers in Prison Committee, we traveled around the world from one frightening dictatorship to another, and I, speaking for myself, was constantly faced by so-called legal attacks on journalists which resemble the attacks by the legal system of Newfoundland and Labrador on Justin Brake. that a Newfoundland and Labrador Supreme Court justice would include in his ruling that Brake's status as a journalist was not a material factor in the case is deeply worrying. In fact, I find it astonishing. It contradicts both the Charter and the history of freedom of expression in Canada, going back to Joseph Howe's famous defense of free expression in the Nova Scotia court on March 2nd, 1835. And it's worth noting that our Constitution has 4 fundamental guarantees, of which the most important and longest is freedom of expression. Those 4 guarantees do not include injunctions against people going onto private property. That is not one of the 4 guarantees in our Constitution. So the idea that freedom of expression could be shut down in the name of an injunction on going into private property goes completely, in my view, and the jury's view, against the Constitution. That Nalcor Energy would intentionally include Mr. Brake's name in the list of those to be charged, even though they knew that he was a journalist covering the demonstration, appears to be deeply cynical. The reporting on this situation, which I have been able to read, suggests that this action by the corporation is unprecedented. Normally, everyone, including corporations, understands that the role of journalists is to cover events and that they are not to be treated from a legal point of view as participants in the event. And I'm not commenting on the other participants. That's another argument, which I'd be happy to make, but not tonight. Think of the precedent involved here. If this is allowed to stand, that a journalist can be charged for covering a demonstration on private property, if this is allowed to stand, think of the impact that this would have on writers at large and their ability to do our job. In both cases, the attempt to silence Justin Brake is an attempt to silence freedom of expression. Mr. Brake showed great courage in staying with the story as it unfolded on the ground. He is showing great courage in fighting against these charges, which are designed to destroy him personally and to frighten other journalists away from fully covering the story. Mr. Brake's case is an urgent and dangerous expression of the intent of this prize and of PEN's very reason for existence. And so we're very proud to be able to give this award to you and filled with admiration for the work that
you did. Thank you very, very much. I'm deeply appreciative and honored to be here receiving a name from PEN Canada and in Ken Filkow's name. It is an honor. I've done a few press interviews lately, and one of the things that I've said in response to the recent recognition of my fight against these charges is that, on one hand, I'd rather not be having to be recognized or have this attention at the moment. At the same time, I'm very grateful for it because as an independent journalist a year and a half ago covering these Indigenous-led resistance to the Muskrat Falls project and then facing the charges, very little was being said about it. By media, by the public, there wasn't a great awareness. So this is a really fantastic opportunity to try to raise the profile because I want journalists in Canada to know. I think many take press freedom for granted, as I did until recently, until facing these charges. This is a right that we have and that we have to protect. It's not a right that we're fighting to gain. We already have it. And I think that is something that needs to be understood in Canada among the media and also among the Canadian public, because at the heart of freedom of expression and freedom of the press in particular is also Canadians' right to know that is enshrined in our Constitution. So this isn't just an attack on journalism or journalists and the media. This is also an attack on all Canadians who want and need to know the kind of information that I was reporting in Labrador and the kind of information that journalists continue to cover today in the context of Indigenous resistance to resource development on Indigenous lands. This is something that the Canadian media has historically failed to cover adequately, but we are finally doing better. And we're seeing at this very moment a similar situation unfolding in British Columbia, where an injunction has been put in place, granted to Kinder Morgan, to keep Indigenous people and their supporters away from that project site. I've said a few times, and I'll repeat it again this evening, if that injunction is violated in the course of these protests, and they are expected to ramp up this summer, we don't want to see journalists standing still while the story moves away from them and we become unable to, as outsiders, as journalists and as the Canadian public, to access the information that we need to see when Indigenous people defend themselves and their land, and then how the state and corporations respond to that. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak and to share my story, and for Mr. Saul to share his thoughts and words on the charges against me. And I'm grateful for the support from APTN, who I'm now working for, who's intervened in the case as well. They've put forth a compelling affidavit to say how detrimental a conviction would be for their reporting Indigenous issues and land defense actions across Canada. I'll leave it at that. I'll be brief, and I'm just really grateful and honored to be here. And I hope that that the discussion around these charges and what they could mean for press freedom in Canada in terms of the chill effect and also the legal precedent that could be set. I hope that we can continue to talk about this. And my ultimate hope is that we can start to foster a healthier culture of appreciation for press freedom, the press freedom that we have, and a stronger, I guess, culture of recognizing it and defending it when we have to, as journalists and as the Canadian public. Thanks very much.